How's it going, everyone? So one of the most important questions in forestry and forest management is the question of exactly how much wood there is in a forest, how much wood you have on your property. And we answer this question with something called a timber cruise, which is a systematic sampling of the trees in a forest. Now that may seem like a simple question and process of answering, but the reality is it's anything but. And that's because trees are not regular things. They come in all sorts of species, of course, but heights and widths and really any other variable you can possibly imagine. So cruising, or forest mensuration if you want to use the academic term, tends to be a pretty complicated and technical process. And that really sucks because the question is really fundamental to a lot of what you do on your forest. So one of the things I've wanted to do since I started this channel is to simplify the process and put the ability to cruise a forest in your hands without sacrificing the integrity, or rather the usefulness, of the derived data. And I've finally been able to do that. We just launched a cruising and inventory tool on silvicultural that is integrated in with the mapping application. So now when you build a harvest or stand polygon, there'll be a little button that says inventory. And when you click it, you can actually upload some cruise point data, and then it will automatically generate statistics on the inventory on that polygon, and it will be divided by species. So as you can imagine, there's a fair amount of differences in how exactly trees grow around the country. And so what this application does is it actually takes the geographic location of the polygon and then applies the most applicable and most accurate variable for that polygon. So your statistics will be calculated by species and region-specific variables, but then you can also look at the data in terms of cords per acre, MBF per acre, cubic feet per acre, and so on. And of course, there are limitations to this data, which we'll discuss as we go. But for now, let's just get right into it. Now, I'm still going to explain everything, but I'm not going to go into great detail. And that's because I've kind of covered everything before in other videos. But also, I have it all written down in How to Read Your Forest, which is my free ebook. You can get in the link in the description and comments below. And to be honest with you, I really need to rewrite that. That's one of my projects this summer, because my methodologies and such have really developed since I first wrote it. But in any case, it really goes over how to easily take basal area, tally points, how to get tree heights, and so forth. All right, so here's my cruise map exported from silvicultural. And as you can see, it's a geotiff. We have the color infrared imagery in the background just because I like to be able to differentiate the species. I prefer the color infrared. And this is kind of limitation number one. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be collecting data in the field through whatever means you prefer. I'll be using a notebook. You can use an Excel sheet on your tablet or phone itself, whatever you want. This is not yet a true mobile application. I hope to develop it into one in the future, but for now we have to take the data out in the field through some other means, and then enter the data when we get home on the desktop. So what I did here is I just kind of added 6 cruise points. What I'd recommend is 5 points minimum for a stand, but at least 1 plot per 2 acres. That should give you a pretty good mix of data there. And when you're putting the points on there, what you can do is actually turn off the imagery and just use the kind of base Google Maps layer. That way you're not unconsciously biasing it by what the canopy looks like. That's easy to do and can really skew your data. And of course, this is just the way I set it up. This is more or less a random sampling method. You can also do it systematically. So you can just walk a straight line through your woods and take a point every 100 feet, pace it out, and then, go take a 90-degree angle, walk another 100 feet, and then go on another line, take a point every 100 feet, so you kind of get a grid-like pattern. I was thinking as I was doing this, maybe someday I would like to have kind of a point randomizer on the mapping application to make this easier, but for now, you just kind of do it however you want. Just do it in a relatively random or unbiased fashion. And actually, just as important as where you're actually taking the points or where you place the points on the map is how exactly you navigate to the points. So especially if you have trails in your woods, you might naturally want to kind of walk those trails to find the points. And then if you're doing that, what you might do is when you get close to the point, you're going to find a good place to collect data, and that's going to massively skew the results as well. So what I would recommend doing is to use your compass to navigate within 100 feet of the point, and then when you're within 100 feet, you take a single bearing and pace your way in to actually the spot where you'll collect data. And if you don't know what pacing is, basically you're doing some rough measurement with how many steps you take. A pace is 2 steps, so every time your right foot touches the ground or your left foot, that is 1 pace, so 2 steps basically. And if you don't know your pace personally, you can use this chart to guess yours and get a good enough estimate. So once we're on the plot center, what we're going to do is we're going to use this. This is an angle gauge. You can also use a prism gauge. The methodology is a little bit different. With this, you are the plot center, and then with the prism gauge, the gauge itself is a plot center and you move around it. I recommend these. They're a little more versatile. You get different basal area factors, as they're called. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this, and you can see that there are different gaps in the tool, and those represent what are called different, let me try to focus that, different, come on, yeah, basal area factors. So we have the smallest one is 5, 10, 20, and then if we flip it to its side, we get 40. Now, which basal area factor do we use? We're generally going to shoot for between 7 and 10 trees per plot. So probably, if you have larger trees, 20, if you have smaller trees, 10, and that's going to be the vast majority of you. If you're in the Pacific Northwest, and you got some real giant trees, then 40, but 10 and 20 is probably what you're going to want. I usually use 10 because I'm in the Northeast and we have smaller trees. So looking at the slot that corresponds with the basal area factor that you choose, you put the end of this chain in your mouth and you swing it around, and you're looking at the trees through that slot. If you can see the edges of the tree in the slot, if it is smaller than the slot itself, that tree is counted out. If you cannot see the edges, if the tree itself is wider than the slot, that tree is in. And we go around and we count how many trees are in based on that criteria, and then we tally how many trees are in by species. So if you have 3 white pine that are in, it'll be 3 white pine, 2 white birch, and I don't know, 3 red spruce. And again, to count those trees, you're going around in a complete circle. So don't double count trees, but don't miss trees. Start at 12 o'clock and end at 12 o'clock. So the theory behind this and what you're actually measuring, with a basal area factor of 10, if you tally 8 trees, 8 times 10, or if you use 20, 8 times 20, 8 times 10 is 80 square feet of basal area per acre. Now, what is basal area? If we were to imagine an invisible plane 4.5 feet off the ground, this is a little academic, but bear with me. If we're to imagine an invisible plane 4 feet off the ground that bisected all the trees on an acre, and so we could see the face of the cut log like this. And every log represented a certain amount of surface area. What if we took every single log that was bisected and we kind of smushed all that surface area together? How many square feet of surface area would there be? Well, that's your basal area. I guess you could say it's a measurement of density as a function of the size of the tree and the frequency of those sizes. So it's a really good kind of proxy for volume per acre and inventory. Now, we're not just collecting basal area, we also have one other important bit of data to collect, and that would be the average merchantable height per plot. So we're going to measure the merchantable height that is representative of the trees in that immediate area. And that can be a little tricky. Sometimes you have to generalize a little bit. Now, what exactly is merchantable height? Merchantable height is the height of the tree that can be merchandised. It is the useful length of the tree. So for hardwoods, that might be at the bottom of the crown. For softwoods, you might go up to a minimum diameter. So for spruce, for example, in the Northeast, that might be where the tree goes below 5 inches in diameter, something like that. Or if you're a small landowner and you use every little bit of the tree, every part of the crown for firewood, it might be the entire tree length. So measuring heights is super simple. I've actually done an entire video about this before. But we're gonna find a stick and we're gonna hold out our arm and put it at eye level. So the stick is parallel to the ground. And without poking our eye here, we're going to get it straight, arm's length, and then we're just gonna flip it up. And what we're essentially doing is we're creating a right triangle. And we're going to walk around, and from this perspective, looking up at the top of the stick, we're going to line up the top of the stick to the merchantable top of that tree. So again, if it's a hardwood, the base of the crown, basically. And wherever that point is, wherever we find that the top of that stick reaches that merchantable top, we're going to stop. And from there, you can either get a 100-foot tape and measure it out to get a more accurate answer, or you can pace again. So count how many paces it takes to get to that tree from where you are, multiply it by your pace length, and then add your eye height. Super simple. And again, for all these measurements, for all these processes, I describe them in great detail on how to read your forest, so grab that PDF. If you're already on my email list and you already have it, just search your inbox again, make sure it's in your downloads folder. I wrote it specifically to be a good reference material for these things. So that's all the data we're collecting, and we're doing that for each point, and then we just go home and enter the data real quick, and then we can get our statistics generated. So let's get started. So this is my map again, and I'm using Avenza Maps. It's a free application that reads GeoPDFs and GeoTIFFs like you can export from silvicultural. Super easy to use. All I'm going to do is just drag the cursor over to my position and hit this draw icon in the corner here, which my screen's wet, so draw and measure, add a point, and then stretch it over to my first plot location. And I have a bearing up here, which it says 332 degrees and 247 feet. So again, to not bias the results, what I might want to do is travel the first bit of that bearing 147 feet, or watch the map and wait until I get fairly close. And then when I'm within around 100 feet, you might even do 200 feet just because of the accuracy. These are usually within plus or minus 30 feet. But you take another bearing and then you just pace the rest of the way in, so you're not just stopping when you find a good place to collect data. So let's do that. I'm going to take my 332 degree bearing, or azimuth if you want to be technically correct, and we'll go from there. And it looks like it is right over there, so let's go. All right, so navigation is simple enough. We're at the first plot. Now again, it's important that you take note of where you actually start, because you're going in a complete circle and you don't want to double count trees. Now, some important notes here. One, unless you're planning on using them in your own management style for firewood or whatever, I would exclude dead trees. And we're technically counting stems, not trees. So if you go around and there's a forked tree that's forked right at the root collar, count both stems. And also, if you have a plot that happens to be right next to a large tree, which I happen to have right here, just kind of lean around it to see if it happens to be covering anything so you don't miss anything. All right, so with that said, let's get started. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so here are the results of the tally, and as you can see, it's just a very basic documenting system, but I was using a basal area factor of 10, which actually might have been, I could have used a 20 because I tallied 18 trees correlating to 180 square feet of basal area. And I'm just keeping track of how many trees of each species I tallied. So my largest was eastern hemlock, 10 trees, then white pine 7, and then I had one definitely dying but still alive white birch. Now this can kind of be the trickiest part of the process because admittedly this is the most simplified part of the process to avoid you having to measure the height on every single tree. So we're going to find a representative tree. Now it can be difficult when you have a 2-age or especially a multi-age stand, but we don't want to go for the largest tree, we don't want to go for the smallest tree, so something that's kind of a good in-between and a good representative of the height of the canopy here. So I'm going to go for a mid-size white pine, and I'm going to measure the merchantable height. So again, the usable height of the tree. So I got 10 paces exactly, and my pace is 5.3 feet. So the merchantable height of that tree is 53 feet. So that's what I'm going to write down for the plot height. So that's all I do, super simple. I'm just going to repeat that 5 more times. Now I'm going to skip ahead here to when I'm done with these plots, but just a quick note. So if you go to the next plot and then you encounter a different species, like if it's a totally different set of species, just leave these species blank. So let's say in plot 2 there's no eastern hemlock. Just put a 0 or leave it blank, and then just add on species over here. You get that? So I'm going to finish this up and I'll see you guys in a bit. All right, so I got all my data here, super simple, super easy. I threw out the last point. This was supposed to be the plot center of my last point, and I'm throwing it out because if you look around, it's very clear that my stand boundary was off, and this is part of a different stand. This area was harvested 15 to 20 years ago, and it's not that we're going to lose this data, we're just going to incorporate it into the other stand. So if I were to have taken that point, it would have pretty largely skewed my data for that stand. So sometimes you just have to make calls like that. It was hard to see from the aerial imagery, but the closer I look, the more I can see that very clearly the stand boundary was just, off. So we're gonna go back in and plug in that data and generate our results. But first, I just wanna say, so I launched silvicultural back in August, and from the beginning, I've been offering a $99 lifetime membership to the program. And honestly, what I've known since the beginning is that has been an unsustainably low price, but it has allowed me to grow relatively quickly and to develop these new tools for you guys. But I am going to be raising the price for that in 1 week on May 12th. Now, I'm not going to be removing the lifetime membership. You'll still have access to that, but I'm going to be raising the price from $99 to $179. Because if you think about it, a one-time payment of $99 over the course of 5-10 years or however long you actively manage your forest, that is an obscenely good deal, and it's going to give you access to any feature I release in the future. And so eventually, like I'm going to keep developing this. This is something that is kind of my life's work, so to speak. So in the future, I might be removing that lifetime membership. And of course, if you've already purchased it, you'll be good. But there will be no more access to new members getting that lifetime membership. I could be having a tiered program. And so honestly, by the time I'm, quote unquote, done development, because my problem is I'm developing this for small landowners, and there's quite a few foresters, actually, professional foresters who have interest. And currently, a lot of my tools, frankly, aren't robust enough for that more professional client. But I might be kind of breaking it up into two tiers. So, for example, the professional forester has access to more technical tools, and the small landowner package has access to the more basic tools. And if you buy the lifetime membership, what I'm guaranteeing you now is you'll have access to both. So honestly, by the time I've kind of completed that arc of development, the lifetime membership could be something that's worth $800. So it really is a great deal. And I've said from the beginning that I'm going to continue to develop. I followed through with that, and I'm super proud of what we have so far, and I know it's just going to get better. So anyway, just some thoughts on that, and wanted to let you guys know that if you wanted a great deal, I would grandfather yourselves in now, because the price will be rising. And I do want to be clear that this isn't just a JCPenney gimmick where the sale never ends or something like that. I do know that times are tough out there for a lot of people, and I want to make this tool as accessible to as many people as possible. But the reality is, there's ongoing costs associated with every customer. For example, the Forester AI, every time somebody sends a message, I pay a little bit of money. The server, it's a pretty bulky website, so the server cost is sizable. And of course, the ongoing development costs are the biggest expense. So anyway, yeah, it was always my intent to raise the price, and I'm just getting to the point where with all the new features that I've released the past couple months, it's at the point now where it's definitely fair to do so. So I'm just making May 12th the cutoff. And yeah, thank you so much to everyone who has joined so far, because this would not have been possible without you guys. Yeah, it's you guys that have been really developing this project. So thank you to everyone. And I hope very much that you enjoy this latest feature and get a lot of use out of it. I know for some of you, you might not really understand this cruising thing, so it's a great time to learn. It's really not that difficult, and once you kind of get the hang of it, it might take a couple practice runs before you really get real data, so to speak. But once you get the hang of it, it's one of the most important forestry skills out there, and now you actually have a way to digest that data. So yeah, anyway, let's go back home. So we're back in the office now, and as we can see, we have our map in front of us and our stand polygon right here that we had cruised. And if we click on the polygon, what we'll see is that we have an option for inventory right here. If your polygon was created before this update, unfortunately, to see this, you're going to have to recreate the polygon. We basically had to create a new feature class in order to do this. So unfortunately, it's not going to show up on polygons created pre-update. So that's the only inconvenience, and I apologize for that, but it was the only way. So anyway, what we can do is we can hit that inventory button, and we have an option to add plots and species, and we're going to get this interface right here. So the first thing you're going to want to do is choose your BAF. Like I said, I was using BAF 10, so that's good like that. And then add your number of plots and species. So we did 5 plots in the end, so I'll add 5, and we ended with 5 species as well, so that works out. So we have 2 here, so we'll just add 3 more. Yep, that's correct. And then the next thing we can do is we can add our species, and we have every species in North America to choose from. So it's divided by softwoods, western and eastern, and then we have hardwoods, oak, maple, birch, and then other. So our first species was eastern hemlock, so obviously eastern, softwood, and we can scroll down and get, did I pass it? Yes, I did. Eastern hemlock. Next we have white pine. Oh, it's the very first one, geez. Next we have white birch, so we go to birch group, and it's in here as paper birch, it's the same thing. Red maple, so maple group, red maple, and then yellow birch, so another birch. Perfect. So what I'm going to do actually is just go down the columns here. So let me enter this data. And finally we add our heights at the end here. So once you have all the data entered, just double check it to make sure it's all accurate, and then you hit confirm, and your statistics are automatically generated. So we have 164 square feet of basal area, 21,000 board feet per acre, or about 45 cords per acre, which is a lot of wood, but it's an extremely overstocked stand that hasn't been harvested in probably well over 100 years. So let's look at how exactly this breaks down. We can see it broken down by species here, and I like to work in cords per acre, so I'm going to click that. And now we can see the breakdown in cords per acre by each species. So the majority of the stand is obviously white pine, and we have 23 cords per acre of just white pine. And the second most numerous species is eastern hemlock. So I kind of had pine, oak, maple as a placeholder for the stand here, and obviously that is not accurate. We'll have to change that. Our third most numerous species is white birch or paper birch at about 8 cords per acre, followed by red maple and then the one yellow birch, which is showing up as 0.5 cords per acre. And if you wanted to, just to avoid these stragglers, you could combine some of the oddball species into the same thing. I think there actually is an option for just other hardwood, something like that, just to make it a little cleaner. But in any case, this is the information that was generated, and honestly, yeah, I think it checks out. I mean, that's obviously a pretty high number, but like I said, it's extremely fully overstocked. I think I had 17 white pine, just white pine on one plot, which is insane. So it's definitely a number that looks realistic to me. But let's just talk for a second about the data limitations here. So this is a pretty basic cruise and inventory program designed for small landowners. In a more comprehensive, I'll call it professional cruise, what you'd probably be doing is measuring the diameter of every tree, the height of every tree, and you'd also be making probably some product class determination. So the most basic form of that is what we call AGS and UGS, acceptable growing stock versus unacceptable growing stock, or in other words, you know, how high quality the stem is. And what we're doing here is we're just getting some very vague data, I guess, about the diameter of the tree, because basal area is a function of the size and frequency of trees, and then we're kind of averaging the height per stand. And on top of that, you know, because we're not making any determination about, for example, the number of usable logs in the tree, or AGS or UGS, the MBF per acre, that can be probably the most rule of thumb and vague measurement here, because, you know, basal area, that's solid. Like, this is exactly how much basal area we have. For cords per acre, cords are a unit of volume. Tons, that's a unit of weight. And then cubic feet of course, is just another unit of volume measured differently than chords, I guess. But 1,000 board feet is different. This is a measurement of yield. So it's actually possible that if you were to use a system in a forest that was total junk, like not a single usable stem of wood, then you could have, 50 chords per acre, but the MBF would be 0 because there's no usable saw log in that entire forest, right? Now, likewise with the heights here, this is a diverse multi-age forest. And so the white birch tended to be shorter than the white pine. White pine is just a taller species in general. And so we were kind of averaging the stand height by the average plot height. And so it's very possible that we were overestimating the volume of white birch because we were entering some stand heights that weren't necessarily realistic for this particular species. So maybe the white pine is actually a little underestimated and the white birch is a little overestimated. So does that mean that this data is useless? No, absolutely not. So forests are pretty predictable. They're statistically regular, and so heuristics tend to work pretty well. Now, maybe there are some outlier stands, like if you're in a forest where every stem is perfect or every stem is horrible, you're going to get some pretty massive under or overestimations of the 1,000 board feet per acre. Or if you have, an extreme bifurcation in the size of the trees, then that's going to skew exactly the species breakdown of the chords per acre. But in general, like in my experience, the more basic cruises like this actually generate pretty similar data to the more comprehensive cruises. But there's another benefit of having a simpler cruise, and that is, especially for amateurs, there are less bottlenecks or choke points for the accuracy of the data. So if you remember, what I was talking about at the beginning of the video was trying to find an unbiased method to navigate to the point. Well, I used to manage interns who did comprehensive cruising projects for a forestry company, and they would spend all summer. That was their job. They would cruise forests, and they would do just what I explained earlier. They would take the diameters, they would take the heights on every tree, and so one point could literally take an hour. But what would end up happening with all that effort is that the data ended up being, in many cases, no good, because you would go in after and do what we would call a check cruise. You would make sure that they're following protocols and taking accurate data. And what they would be doing is they'd be going down a harvest trail, and then they would feel guilty about taking a point in the trail. They might feel like they weren't supposed to for some reason, and then they might just kind of go off to the side of the trail into the forest. But of course, harvest trails are 25% of the forest itself, so if you're not sampling those appropriately, you're going to be massively overestimating the wood in the forest. Or another example, I was measuring heights in this case with a stick, which I'm convinced is the most accurate method to measure tree heights. But we used to use these Swedish products called Haglof pucks or something, and they were sonar, I think, or I don't really remember how they worked. But they would emit this little sound, and then it would measure how long it took for that sound to come back, and it would estimate distances and do some trigonometry internally and tell you how tall a tree was. And you could do the exact same thing on the same tree 3 times in a row, and it would generate 3 different heights. So it was always like plus or minus 15 feet. So despite having a more comprehensive cruise with more granular data, the quality of that data was hamstrung by the inaccuracy or inconsistency of these Haglof pucks. So I guess what I'm trying to say is the more data you have and the more granularity of that data you have, the more opportunities you have for human error and bad assumptions. So honest to God, most of the time, for the vast majority of applications, this is going to give you the best data, and I truly believe that. So it's kind of like those fishing scales you can buy that say not for trade. This is absolutely great for determining sustainable harvest yields. This is great for kind of making an estimate for maybe the stumpage value of your woodlot, something like that. But don't use it for the basis of making financial decisions, and don't use it as the basis for a contract with a logger. And frankly, I don't really care what the methodology is or who does the cruise. If you're ever using cruise data as the basis of any financial decision, you're making some pretty bad choices, in my honest opinion, because even the best data can be prone to some pretty extreme error. So yeah, but it's kind of like the harvest planning tool. If you guys remember from when I released this is a pretty basic thing, but it's determining based on an area control system how many acres you can harvest every harvest interval sustainably. And then I have an estimated harvest yield, which is, it's not actually the basis of how much you're actually cutting. So again, the accuracy doesn't really matter, but it's just estimating it. So you can now use these numbers to plug into this harvest planning tool to get a better estimate for what your, what would be the right word? Not your annual yield, but your consistent yield is, I guess. Anyway, guys, this is a really great tool to use. It's absolutely the best way to get some usable, practical data for your land. And for example, in How to Read Your Forest, I have some very rough volume tables. And this is easily 10 times better than those volume tables because it's region specific. So you can see here, like I have the New England region that it's automatically calculating. It has different formulas for each species that are derived from Forest Service formulas. It's just really cool. I'm really proud of it. And like I said, I hope you guys find utility in it. And most of all, I hope you, if you're not familiar with cruising, I really hope you get yourself an angle gauge and give it a try. It's one of the most important forestry skills for sure. So next up, what I want to do, I've been kind of in development mode for a while, and keep in mind I am just a one-man team. Of course, I do hire contractors for the coding, but for the most part, it's just me. And so I have really gotten behind in kind of coalescing all these different features and creating good usable tutorials so people can start with nothing and then use the tools in a comprehensive manner to build themselves a basically a good management system for their forest. And I haven't done that, so I really need to do that for you guys. I think what I'm going to do in the next few weeks is build essentially a mini course where I go from beginning to end, how to take a piece of property, delineate it, map out the boundaries, map out the stands, cruise the stands, create management goals or plans for each stand, and do that so you have a more functional understanding of how to use these tools for your own benefit. And looking further into the future, there are some slight updates I want to make to this mapping program, especially in terms of like the export and map creation tools, like exporting maps. Somebody had brought up introducing like a legend feature and such. Now, taking a second to look further into the future, I think what I'd like to do is kind of create a plan crafting tool, plan writing tool, where it takes some of the data you've created from all the other applications and coalesces it into something where you can actually create a single document that describes all this stuff. So, for example, you can populate the document with your stands from the mapping program. You can populate it with this inventory data here. And then you can use the Forester AI to create in paragraph form your goals and objectives for that stand. And possibly what I could even do with that is I could research the legal requirements for various states and kind of create a legally compliant system, and create a system that can create legally compliant management plans. So then all you'd have to do is get it signed by a licensed forester and uses it as the basis for forest tax subsidies for property tax and so forth. I don't really know. I have to research that a lot more. I'm just spitballing. I'm not making any promises. I kind of make this up as I go. And of course, I always love to hear your feedback. Let me know what improvements you'd like to see, what you want to see happen with this program, because a lot of our improvements have come from you guys. So yeah. All right, I think that's all for now, guys. Don't forget, if you need any deeper explanation for some of these processes, I have most of that documented in How to Read Your Forest, so grab that. And of course, like I said, I'm going to increase prices for this on May 12th, so you still have about a week to join up and grandfather yourself at that lower price point. And yeah, so anyway, I'm going to be doing a lot more with this tool in the weeks to come, so stay tuned. Catch you guys later.